Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Malcolm Maestrel and I'm a Membership Services Coordinator with IAAP. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Your CMS is an accessibility assistant. Before we begin, we have a few general housekeeping items to go over. Closed captioning is provided. To enable closed captioning, select the CC icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. The stream text links for English will be posted in the chat as well. And I'm going to turn over to Susanna for the translations.
So we do provide translations, automatic translations of the captions in 4 languages. Vous pouvez lire les sous-titres en français si vous suivez le lien fourni dans le Chat. Sie können das auf Deutsch lesen, wenn Sie dem im Chat angegebenen Link folgen. Puedes leer el español si sigues el enlace provisto en el chat. Du kan läsa texten på svenska om du klickar på länken som vi lägger i chatten. And now back to English.
Thank you, Susanna. American Sign Language interpretation is also provided. Microphones are muted to prevent any background noise or disruptions. Please post your questions in the Q&A. Questions will be saved until the end of the session. The chat will be monitored for general dialogue and technical issues. Today's webinar will be recorded and available in our webinar archives, and we will send out a copy of the recording and presentation to everyone who registered. And now I'd like to turn today's program back over to Susanna.
Thank you, Malcolm, and welcome everyone. It's always encouraging to see we have almost 200 registered for this webinar. I see people still coming in, not as many as 200, but I know that many of you also look at our webinars afterwards. We do record this and put it on the website. But we'd love to have you live with us, of course, also to get a good discussion afterwards and to have questions and so on. So this is part of the IAAP EU webinar series that I lead. And the IAAP EU is an initiative to make sure that everyone who is either a resident in the EU or just working here get information at the EU level, and that we can provide member benefits to all our EU membership, even though if they are in a EU chapter or just EU working in EU or living here. So welcome to this. We will have another 2 webinars later on in November. And then, of course, more events and so on coming next year. But today, I'm very happy to welcome a dear friend of mine, Hidde de Vries, who will talk to us about built-in accessibility in content management systems. And I started to meet Hidde more and more when we were doing a research project a couple of years ago called Cluster, where we also looked into what the CMS system or publishing systems can do to help the authors, because it seems stupid that if we want to have accessible websites and then we have thousands or millions of content creators that we need to train to become accessibility experts so that they can publish accessible content, that is a little bit kind of working backwards. It would be much better if the content management systems could actually support this in a more automatic or semi-automatic way. And Hidde has done a lot of good work on this, and now I'm really curious to hear what the latest news are from your side. So Hidde, I know you have been previously at W3C and now working with Sanity, but I think you can also present yourself. If you could please start sharing and also open your camera so we can see you.
And I'll unmute myself as well. Thanks so much for that great introduction. So yeah, I want to talk about how you can see your CMS as an accessibility assistant. And I know of the great work that Fonka have been doing in this We for Authors cluster, where me and Susanna met a few times. This is a really cool project that I also encourage you to check out. So your accessibility, your CMS as an accessibility assistant is something I started saying when I started looking more at CMSs and how they can help. Briefly, a quick introduction. So my name is Hidde, as Susanna said. I like to blog. I write a lot about accessibility, web standards, HTML, CSS, all sorts of things on my blog. That's hidde.blog. I registered this domain solely so that I can more easily share the URL with people. I write on there. I'm also an accessibility specialist, having worked as both a front-end developer and an accessibility person for over a decade with lots of different organizations like governments and e-commerce and more like that. And I currently work in developer relations at a company called Sanity.io. We are a platform for managing content. So you can go in there, put your content with us, edit it, manage it, make relationships between your content. We're a Norwegian company, or founded in Norway. And now we have offices in both Norway and in the US, in San Francisco. And we work for customers worldwide, making their content strategy better by providing solutions for that. This is not a sales pitch for Sanity. I do encourage you to check it out. But I want to talk today specifically, of course, about accessibility. Now, having worked in accessibility for a while and working in that field as someone coming from a development background, I've often talked to web developers and gotten questions like this one. Only recently, I was talking to a friend of mine who is doing front-end development at a very large website, and she was a bit frustrated. She's very focused on accessibility and trying to get accessibility right, and knows a lot about it, but seems frustrated. Why isn't it easier to do accessibility? And I think that's a valid question. It can be pretty hard to get accessibility right, even if you want to. It's not a reason not to do it, of course, because it would be ableist to say, hey, accessibility is hard, so I'm not going to do it. We all have to do it for various reasons, right? It's a human right, and the law says so. It makes business sense, etc., etc. Yet it isn't as easy as it can be. When I was at the W3C, I worked on guidance for accessibility and trying to think about how that can be better, because there is a problem there. Like, it's hard to find the right information. But it's also the case that there are certain bits of software that could have accessibility built in. So Susanna asked me to talk about this built-in accessibility, and I have this as a bit of a passion of mine. Can't we build in accessibility to our product so that it becomes easier to do, so that we can focus on other parts of accessibility as web developers, for instance, by putting the stuff that we could build into systems. Clients love this too. They're really excited when you start talking about, hey, we could automate some of this for you. But they shouldn't get too excited, because there are systems that promise you to fix problems automatically, so-called overlay companies. And I encourage you, if you come across them, to go to overlayfactsheet.com, which is a website that talks about accessibility overlays and why they are not the solution that they say they are. They are ineffective, and that has been confirmed by a large amount of people working on web standards, people coming from a lot of different countries, people who have disabilities, people who have worked in accessibility for a long time, lawyers, makers of assistive technologies, etc., etc. So as the community will agree, that's not something that we can do. This is not a way that we can build in accessibility. There are other ways, though, and I want to talk about those other ways, right? Design systems, for instance, are an excellent way to build in accessibility to some of your work. If you are able to take your design and split it up into reusable components, then you can make your accessibility, or at least some of it, reusable and repeatable. And that is extremely valuable. In this screenshot, you see Sanity UI, which is the component system that we open sourced. A lot of organizations do this. Material UI is right next to it from Google. There are a lot of companies that have open sourced their design systems and that share how they are working. And a lot of organizations have their own systems too. So they can all do that. They can all build in accessibility and make it reusable and repeatable. It's a bit of a responsibility as well, because if you have inaccessible components, you're making the inaccessibility repeatable and reusable. if you have accessible components, then you make accessibility reusable and repeatable. That's what you want. So, be very sure that the thing that you are repeating and reusing is actually accessible and has been tested in a lot of ways. So in the design system, you could do things like document do's and don'ts and gotchas. Here's an example from Sanity UI, where we have a heading component, which basically makes the heading. And for reasons, we allow developers to choose which heading tag they use or which tag they use at all. So it is a div by default, and you can choose which kind of element you want. Now, for accessibility, of course, you want H1 or H2 or all the way to H6. You want the actual heading elements to be used there. So that's something you can document in your design system to say, hey, this is how you are supposed to use this, and for this and this reason, you can explain how users use the web and why that helps, that sort of thing. Another way design systems can be super effective is when you have very complex components like tabs or carousels, things that take a really long time to build well and to do accessibly, to have those abstracted out so that they can be reused. If you've put all that work into making it accessible, testing it with users, making your code work really well, then that reusability is super effective, because these are the kinds of components where you can introduce inaccessibility if you don't build them well. So complex components are great for reuse. Whether you do that yourself in your own design system or whether you use these components from the bigger design systems like the Bootstrap or Material that are offered by larger companies that have maybe more time to test accessibility. Another thing you can do in design system is to test per component with tools like Storyblock. You can have like an accessibility tab. So Storyblock takes all your components and it can like make a gallery of them, so you can look at all the different components that you have. And with each of them, you can show, look, this is what it looks like, this is the code, and then this is the accessibility. And basically, you can use a plugin that will automatically test all of the components in isolation and then tell you if there are any problems. And that is, again, really helpful. Even though you can't test a lot of accessibility automatically, the stuff you can test will save your life. It will be very helpful to do that early, nice and early. Browsers are another place where you can work on accessibility by building it in. Browsers could fix a small subset of accessibility issues in the content automatically for end users. At least that's what I think. I have been modest and put in a picture of myself presenting somewhere else. I'm sorry to do that, but this is a screenshot or a picture for me at a ViewSource conference a few years ago, a conference organized by Mozilla for people who work on browsers. And they had this contest where they asked people, what should we build into browsers, or how should we change browsers? And I submitted this idea of, why don't you fix some accessibility problems automatically? And it was all cool. Really good responses. Some of the problems that I talked about have been fixed since as well, which is really nice. And there's a bunch of things that a browser could fix. I was clear there to say, this is not a get out of jail for free card. It never is. None of the solutions I'm presenting today are a way to get out of jail free, but they can be very helpful. And these are all examples of ways where a browser could take matters in their own hands. If a website has problems, it can fix those. It's a little bit like overlays, but done better, because a browser has more insight in what's wrong and better ways to fix those things. A couple of examples. If you have text that is truncated with CSS, so you see like a few dots instead of all of the context, you could have the browser force the truncation to go away, so that you can read that this says Linda McCartney vegetarian quarter pounder rather than just qua ... That's something a browser could force to do, because it does the CSS for you, and it can do the CSS differently, basically. a browser could force color contrast. So if you are on a website where there is some white text positioned on top of an image, a browser could put a background behind that text and make that work. That is something a browser could do. The designer of the website might not like it, but the user might, because they just want to read the text. A browser could force focus indication. That's one of the ones that I started this project with, of like figuring out what browsers could do. Because I spent a lot of time like in WCAG audits telling web developers or designers to do focus indication to show where the focus is on the page. A lot of websites don't have this. This made me sad also because it's just one line of CSS, right? It's colon focus, and then you can say, draw a big line around it. It's one line of CSS in between the user and the website that kind of breaks or makes it. And this is something a browser could force if the user wants to. If they want to see what has focus always, a browser could help with that. GIFs or autoplaying videos are another issue on the web that browsers could fix because they could stop videos and things from playing. So that is also helpful. Then browsers could be, or problems could be fixed in HTML automatically sometimes as well. If browsers or HTML have things built in that come with accessibility for free. The image tag is an example of that. It comes with an alt attribute allowing you to provide alternative text for an image. Video tag is another example. It lets you do captions, and it does them for you. Just supply the caption file and the browser will make sure the right caption shows at the right time. So that's stuff that's built into HTML. That's really helpful. Although a lot of it has accessibility problems sometimes. I wrote a post called "More Accessible Defaults, Please," where I encourage browser makers to look at that. It would be great if some of these issues would be addressed so that HTML really has accessibility built in the way that it is supposed to. It will make accessibility advocacy a lot easier too, because you could say, hey, just use the right HTML and it will work. And these are all problems that are much easier for browsers to fix. Not easy, but easier than for individual web developers. If the HTML video player works, and it has all the accessibility edge cases covered, then that's a lot better than that every individual website out there. Billions of websites all need to build their own video player and have potential for bugs there. It's better if the bug surface is just the browser engineers, like that one team at Chromium and that one team at Gecko who are building these engines and can fix these issues, rather than every single web developer in the world. Okay, but we're not here to talk about design systems necessarily, or browsers or HTML. I'm here to talk about CMSs. How could they help with accessibility in the authoring process? So let's talk about CMSs and their accessibility. As mentioned, I spent some time on this at the W3C when I was working there. And now I work at a company that makes a CMS. So I'm interested in this. I'm passionate about this. I feel like CMSs could be helpful. How do you know that your CMS is accessible? How can you find out? There are different standards for accessibility. You're probably very familiar with WCAG as accessibility professionals, the standard for web content, the guidelines that are specifically for web content. There are more standards like UAC, that is just for browsers, other user agents, and ATAG, which is for authoring tools, or as I like to say, tools that make web content. So WCAG is for web content, and ATAG is for the tools that make it. There is a tool offered by the W3C, the ATAG report tool, that I helped build when I was there, which helps you create audit reports for ATAG or in the ATAG format. And there's also work happening on a list of authoring tools where ultimately people would be able to find authoring tools that support accessibility well. I worked on this when I was there, and that's about a year ago. I have heard from the team that they are very soon going to be open for submission. So keep an eye out for that if you work on a CMS, or if you are about to buy one, and try and get your CMS vendor to try and submit to this list. Now, what about ourselves? At Sanity, we have very recently done an accessibility review of our CMS product. So we call ourselves a platform for content. We have a CMS and we have a cloud where content lives. Basically, that's the two parts. And then we have APIs that talk in between. what we've done is a review of the CMS part of this. So the place where people go in to edit content, because we wanted to know what kind of barriers might exist there and which kind of things we need to remove and fix, what we need to work on. This is something I've done in August, September, and just yesterday we published a blog post about it to announce it to the wider world, because it's a bit scary to go public with your own accessibility situation, because we all know nothing is 100% accessible, and there are issues, of course, in every product and also in ours. But we thought we'd share some lessons. So you can find that blog post online. The slides will go out later, and you can find the links there too. But just to highlight, we picked WCAG to do our audit rather than ATAC that I've just been talking about. Why? ATAC is for authoring tools. The reason basically is a little technical, is that the Sanity Studio, which is our CMS product, it doesn't really make web content. It is made to manage content that is kind of agnostic to where it is used. So you can make content that you can then use in your HTML, or you can use it in a PDF, or you can use it in XML, or kind of whatever you want. So the place where you manage content, you're not creating web content yet. The web content happens after that. So the content exists sort of in the CMS, in Sanity, and then when developers start to work with it by building a website that uses the content, that's where the web content is made. So we felt like, hey, this is maybe not really truly a CMS, although that's what we call it, because it's what everyone would associate it with. But there's no HTML in Sanity. We have people that create just thousands of PDFs with the content that are in Sanity. We have people who output to HTML or to XML, to other formats. We even have a customer that create books out of the stuff that's in Sanity. So no web content. Another reason we chose WCAG is that there is an evaluation method, WCAG EM, the WCAG evaluation method that provides steps for and a harmonized process for how to do WCAG audits. That was helpful. We wanted to use that so that if we ever get external auditors to look at it, they could continue with the same thing because it's more commonly known. WCAG also maps better to VPATs, and just to emphasize, ATAC is still full of very useful advice, and we might do an audit later as well for ATAC. It's kind of a superset of WCAG. One of the first success criteria in ATAC is actually to meet WCAG, so that's a good first step. Now, to do an audit of a CMS is a bit different than doing an audit from a website. I've been doing a lot of audits for government websites that usually just had information on them with accessibility issues in that information, of course, and I write those down. The issue with the CMS or any kind of app-like software, as I'm sure many of you know, is a bit trickier because there's a lot of different moving parts. Stuff might disappear, and there might be things that when you click on them, something else appears, and all these sorts of things. Another challenge that we had with Sanity specifically is that Sanity is hyper customizable. So this is something I enjoy working at Sanity to see our different customers, because all of our customers use Sanity in a completely different way. So here's a screenshot of this content management system. Basically, any client that we see will have a slightly different studio. Sometimes they will have different colors. They have organized it differently. The goal with that is that it works for their business, right? So we make it easy to adapt for the business, but that makes it harder to do an accessibility review because which customization are you going to use? We ended up choosing a demo instance that we use to show customers and just say that is now all of Sanity, knowing that all of our customers have a slightly different way of organizing their content, and they might use different plugins, etc., etc. I think this is a problem many CMSs will have because customization is a big thing. That also made the scope and target a little bit harder because there are a lot of instances which one you're going to pick. As said, we used a demo site. And then there were a bunch of things that we knew was kind of beyond WCAG, like real-time collaboration. Like in our system, people can be in the same field at the same time, so they can write content together, a bit like Google Docs kind of stuff. And there is not a lot in WCAG that is specifically focused on that or that gives guidance around that. Of course, there are criteria that say like if there's status updates, then they need to be communicated. But this kind of like real-time collaboration isn't defined as well. At the W3C, they're working on real-time collaboration document, which I think is really exciting. CTAUR is called. Look that up if you're more interested in that. They're looking at tools like, I think tools like Miro and where you do like online whiteboarding. But I feel it's also about these sorts of things where you collaborate together in one field, and how do you make sure it's accessible for everyone who is on there. Okay, so as mentioned, there are different standards you can use. We ended up using WCAG, but ATAG is just as important when we're talking about authoring tools. And I want to just give you some information on what is in ATAG. It has two parts. So one is about the editing experience, part A, and then there's another part about the output. So the editing experience is basically where someone goes in to edit content. It is accessibility for content editors, basically, to make sure if you are a university or a government or a company who needs to hire people for the content department, that you can also hire people with disabilities, because if your CMS isn't accessible, you can't do that, and that would be really bad. So the editing experience is part A, and then part B is about what does your CMS output. And then it's not just about the output itself, but also about how does the CMS actually help with output. In summary, it's about supporting the production of accessible content. This is how I got to my accessibility assistant thing. Is basically, is the CMS a good accessibility assistant? Does it make it easy to create accessible content? And does it help with that? Now, accessible content is stuff like to have tables that have headers, or to have form fields that have labels, to have hero images with plenty of contrast, videos with captions, content that's multilingual and has the right lang attributes in the HTML, content that's nested according to specification, carousels that can be paused, sensible heading structures, all these sorts of things. I'm probably not telling you anything new as accessibility professionals. Like, these are the sorts of things that we're looking for in a website. When we're looking for accessibility, we want to make sure these things are in place. Now, if an CMS is an accessibility assistant, it avoids inaccessible content too. So it avoids tables that don't have headers, form fields with no names, heroes with illegible text, videos that don't have captions, multilingual content where the lang attribute is not there, non-standard nesting, carousels with no pause button, and headings that are used for the wrong reasons or maybe completely forgotten about. So a CMS, if they can help us avoid these sorts of problems, that would be super powerful. Now, that's kind of what ATAG Part B is about. And I want to look at some practical examples of that. And not a lot of CMSs have these features. So in these examples, let's look at the question, does it have the feature or is it trivial to add? Because these are all things that you could sometimes trivially add to your systems. And then it doesn't have to have the feature as long as you can add it yourself, right? That would be a good first step. So ATAG B112 is about when content is generated, it is accessible. So for instance, if your CMS allows you to create a table, that it creates the right markup for it. In that case, you will want your CMS to ask for required information like a caption for table, alt text for images that are in a carousel, labels for form fields, these sorts of things. Now, this might sound trivial, but there are a lot of authoring tools like social media or authoring tools. That large social media platform that recently fired their entire accessibility team, they didn't have support for alternative text for a long time. So this might sound like a given, but there's a lot of CMSs where, if you want to create an image with alternative text, that's not something it allows to do. So yeah, look for that. Look for, can I actually add all the HTML that I need to add in? Other automated checks or are some manual checks suggested because you can't automate everything? Like, is it asking users to check if the heading structure makes sense, or if they're using images that have alternatives in a certain use case, is the alternative still good? That sort of stuff. Does it allow for creating the content, as I mentioned earlier, like an image field that has an alternative text, or a video player that has a field to upload captions? Accessible templates can be super powerful as well to look for in a CMS. So accessible templates for common use cases, if you have those available, you can also drive a lot of accessibility through that. Then UI components, if your CMS provides those, the standard calls them pre-authored content, but I'll call them UI components. So basically anything that your CMS ships with, it would be helpful if there is accessibility there. And if that has been tested, it's a bit like a design system in a way. That is really helpful because then you're providing solutions that maybe are harder to make inaccessible and trivial or easy to make accessible. So yeah, if when they were built accessibly, that saves a lot of time. And I've seen them, like customers who have to hack around sort of inaccessible UI components that they added through a plugin or something like that. Now, CMSs could warn about color contrast issues, like if you have a header with some text in it, like I have a black cat that has some white text on top of it, and it's beautiful, it has a lot of contrast. But then someone, a colleague comes in and uploads a video or a photo of Korean food, for instance, which in this case is a very light picture that goes underneath this very light text, and suddenly I don't have sufficient color contrast. The CMS could give a warning about that and say, hey, that doesn't have enough contrast, and even provide suggestions around it on how to improve it. Now, these are all things that you can do and build into your CMS, or look for a CMS that hasn't built in. And I think that would be super helpful to have. Another example is a spell checker. If you make spelling mistakes, that could create accessibility problems. Like if you have a button with the text SWB MIT, it looks like submit visually, maybe, and depending on your font, it could look almost like it, but it's really hard to use for someone with a screen reader who wouldn't maybe understand the context. So if there's a spell checker, that's better. A bit of a contrived example, but in general, if your content doesn't have spelling errors, that is helpful, and it will make your content more accessible. Readability levels is another thing that is possible for CMSs to establish automatically. These algorithms aren't perfect, right? For figuring out what's the readability of a text. There are known issues around that, but they can give a very good indication. And if you have something like that, basically built in Grammarly into your CMS, that can create more accessible content too, because there are a lot of people who are low literate in the world. And then lastly, if you have examples like documentation and other places, accessible examples are really helpful too. And that's something to look for as well when you're choosing a CMS, like, is the documentation actually clear about accessibility? So how can we use CMSs as accessibility assistants? I want to give you a couple of examples of where I've seen this in the wild, and also look at how in Sanity we're playing around with some of this. So for instance, for Joomla, there is a plugin called Jually, which is based on Sally, and Ally is A11Y for accessibility. And basically what it does is it overlays a accessibility panel on top of your front end in the preview mode, and basically allows you to find accessibility problems like, does this have sufficient contrast? Is there a label on this form? That sort of thing. So it looks at the rendered content, the content as it would appear on your site, and then it gives you information on whether it is accessible. There's something very similar for Drupal called Editorially. It is based on the same thing, I believe, like it's a fork, and they changed a couple of things there. And again, you can use it to find problems in the front end. But actually, it would be even better and more effective if you could find problems while you're authoring. So while you're making content, if you are getting help there. That's ultimately when people used Microsoft Word back in the day. There was this Clippy that would give you help when you were writing content. It would tell you like, hey, can I help you format this content, or can I do something? So if we can interject while content editors are working on content, that would be even better. And that's something that Gutenberg allows you to do. The Gutenberg editor, if you have some text that has contrast and you change the text color so that it no longer has enough contrast, there is a little warning that shows up and it will tell you, hey, this doesn't have sufficient contrast, and it will only disappear if you select a color that has more contrast. Gutenberg is an example of a very new authoring tool. So it can have these kinds of things built in, which is really cool. It also came with a lot of accessibility problems when it was launched, and I believe there's still accessibility issues there. So many of them have been fixed, and then new ones were introduced, etc. It's a long-term thing, but these sorts of features that it has built in, I think, are really, really helpful because you get information right in place about what's wrong, basically. Now, looking at Sanity, we are passionate about structured content, which is basically content that's reduced to the smallest possible bits so that it can be reused. It is content basically as data. An example is if you have opening times on your website, you could put those opening times inside of a WYSIWYG field, like a rich text field, and just type them there. But what we would recommend is to actually save that as data. So you would create a field where you say, okay, this is for the Monday, and then you have a start time and end time, and you can create multiple of those. So you could say, you know, the start time is 11 and an end time is 12, and another start time is 1 and another is 2, which basically is entering data about when you're open. It doesn't create a presentation yet, and that allows you to decide what stuff looks like when you're building the front end. So the front end for this opening times data could be something like, we're currently closed, or will be open in half hour. That sort of information could show up in the front end based on that data. It makes it a bit more flexible. It means we have no HTML in the database. That's something we try to avoid, and that we are avoiding because we feel like it's better if the HTML is created after the content so that you're more flexible. So we end up with content that is basically JSON. So here's a bunch of Nobel Prize winners. And then we have ways to query that content. So you can like find all the Nobel Prize winners whose first name is Marie. If I spell the word first name as it is in the property, so I can query for something like, I'll say first name equals Mary, and then I get all the Nobel Prize winners that have that. It's just one person, one Mary has won this prize. If I start looking for other things like where they were born, like Warsaw, I'll get more results. Like Mary is born there, but there are also other people born in the same place. So we like to see our content as data like this that is then easy to query and to look inside of. Your content inside of like an Excel sheet. Think about it like that, but in a very flexible way. And why am I telling you all this? Aren't we talking about accessibility today? Yes, we are. The reason that I wanted to talk about this is that this is also something we do with content. So rich text is what I mean. So we have an editor that is basically what you see is what you mean rather than what you see is what you get. So instead of an editor where you say, hey, I want this blue big heading, you'll say something like, I want a heading that is number 2 within the heading hierarchy. And the reason that that's helpful is that it doesn't make decisions yet about what stuff looks like. And it allows you, if this is stored as data, you basically get like a JSON file that you can query and look into. And that is something that we can then use to write validation. So it's a bit of a technical story. If there's developers in the room, you'll probably be like, hey, that's great. Basically, it's all data, and it means that you can use script like JavaScript to write validations. And that's something that I've been playing with. And I'll show you how in a second. So basically, we can look for things like, hey, here is a list, but it's not an actual list. Someone has written 3 paragraphs that happen to start with a star or with a dash. And it might look like a list visually, but it's not a list as in HTML. It's a violation of WCAG 1.3.1. Right? This is not the right info and relationships. So those sorts of validations we can add into our rich text editor because everything is stored in data. We can kind of traverse the trees and then figure out sort of what sort of content is in there. So a couple more examples. So you could have a heading that's basically bold text and give a warning about that. Or here's a list that is just words that start with a dash. Or you could have a link that is called click here. These are all things that you could find if you have the content available as like JSON in your JavaScript. Then you can look for these sorts of things and get error messages in, and then turn your CMS into an error reporter, basically. A CMS as an accessibility assistant is something you can do when you store everything as data. Then there are a lot of validations that you could think about, like, do the headings have a hierarchy? Are there any links with 0 content? Which would be bad. Or are there links with images that don't have an alternative or have like an empty alternative? Would be bad because the link wouldn't have an accessible name, for instance. I'm sure that a lot of you here will be able to come up with better validations or more validations. I mean, I imagine all of you or many of you work in making audit reports, so you will have seen your fair share of content inaccessibilities. So if you have everything available as data, you might be able to write a lot of rules that are like, hey, here's a problem that I found in your content. And then we can warn people while they're writing it. So as soon as you go, hey, I'm going to make a heading with just bold text, you can shout out a warning or even say, hey, you cannot save this because what you're doing there is not semantic. It's going to not meet 131. Let's try and fix it right here and right now. Another way that you can use your CMS as an accessibility assistant is by using previews. So this is a concept that you find in a lot of CMSs. It's basically you're editing content and you can then look at what content would look like on your website. Now in Sanity, you can do that as well. You can like create a custom preview for a bit of content. And one thing that you could do with that is create a preview that is just the headings, because a lot of people who use screen readers, they browse by headings. So what if you could have a list of just the headings that's kind of displayed right next to your content? If you have that, then you can kind of easily verify, is this a list of headings that I could browse by? Is this a good representation of the content? Are these things that are useful to navigate to? And then basically consider your usability right there in your editor. Or you could do previews that are image-based, like what does this page look like or this image when someone cannot see color? Those are the kind of things that you could preview. And then an editor, even if they are not accessibility specialists, they can see, hey, this doesn't actually work. Now, these kinds of examples, they are kind of simulating disability. So it's not a one-on-one replacement for like fully testing everything, but it can really give insights to content editors who might not know a lot about accessibility and, still see, hey, maybe I should add more contrast to this image or, those sorts of things. So previews could be a really good way, again, to find accessibility problems or help editors to find problems when they arise. Now, lastly, I want to show you that accessibility is something that you can and probably should do at every single step of your process. So some organizations have like a very linear process, waterfall, go from planning to interaction design to visual design to development to quality assurance, and then they launch their thing. In reality, it more often looks a bit messier. And if you're agile or you work interdisciplinary with different departments together at the same time, some of these things might happen at the same time as well. And often you'll find that you kind of go back from like launch back to planning when you launch a new feature, or from launch to interaction design or visual design, those sorts of things. So you'll realize like, oh, I'll need to go back to other stages of my process. Now, in each of these stages, you are able to do something about accessibility. when you're planning, you can choose a CMS or an authoring tool that supports accessibility, that has the ability to add previews, that lets you do validations in a way that makes sense and is easy for you or for your developers to customize. In your interaction design phase, you might want to document all of the accessibility aspects of the UI and test with users with disabilities might be a good time there. When you do visual design, you can find stuff like color contrast issues, but also provide accessible examples when this kind of stuff gets reused. Within development, you can pick themes and plugins that support accessibility. And in quality assurance, you can add automated tests. And then when you launch, you may have found a lot of problems already. And that is really, really helpful. Like if you can find the problems way before you launch, it becomes a whole lot cheaper to fix them. That might sound weird if you're an accessibility consultant. But yeah, when you come in as an accessibility consultant, it is much more fun if a lot of these problems have been tackled before and you can actually work and focus on the more important and more challenging issues. Because honestly, like color contrast issues, we shouldn't really have to find them in the websites if people would be using the right teams or the right tools, if they would be able to fix them before they actually launch the product. So, in conclusion, a couple of things that I wanted you to take away from today's presentation. One is that accessibility, although it can't be automated and not everything has an easy fix, I do not want to pretend that. There are some issues that are easy to fix and that we could build into places like design systems, browsers, and CMSs. Now, if we use a CMS, it would be great to use one that can be work to set up as an accessibility assistant for your content editors, so that people who edit content actually get feedback based on what they're doing. The custom validations and previews can be really good tools for that. And in general, if you do accessibility, it is easier and cheaper and better if you do it earlier. If you can move a lot of the finding issues and barriers, if you can move that to earlier in the process, because then later in the process, you can focus on the more complex things and start to fix real bigger usability issues. Because yeah, it's bad if there's a lot of low-hanging fruit when you start doing auditing, because that might take away time from other issues. Now, with that, I want to thank you very much. I want to let you know that the slides are on talks.hiddedevries.nl. If that's a bit long, in a minute, I'll also tweet it out at HDV or on Mastodon, HDV at frontend.social, frontend with a dash between front and end. And questions you can ask now or on hidde@sanity.io. Feel free to contact me.
Thank you, Hidde. That was really a lot of information in a short time, but you managed to stay very much in the time frame. So thank you for that, and really a lot of new and interesting information. And we do have a few questions. So the first one is: do your clients require this? I guess the built-in accessibility, or even understand it? They tend to see accessibility as something that should be tested afterwards. So. Is this, I mean, I think is Sanity working with this because you think it's the right thing to do, or is it actually a demand from your clients? I guess that is the question here.
Yeah, it's a bit of both. Coming from a W3C, I hope that more clients would demand it, because that's something that, yeah, someone mentioned in the chat, like it's, if you do it in procurement, it's easier to fix accessibility problems, right? If you use ATAC as a way to get to quicker WCAG compliance, that just seems very smart to do. So I would hope more people do it. We do get requests from clients about this. Not as many as I would hope, but it's kind of slowly starting to happen. We also just feel it's the right thing to do. It just makes sense. So I'm only with Sanity for less than a year. So I didn't do this, like it existed for a couple of years, and a lot of the engineers are really into making sure that stuff works with like keyboard and like a lot of the kind of basics. They were already there before I started auditing, because yeah, people care generally that the web just works for everyone, and yeah, want to make sure that it does.
Yeah. So a related question is Sanity better out of the box, or do the customers need to add the accessibility features themselves?
It depends on what you're asking about. So we're basically like a toolkit or a framework for building a CMS, which adapts to kind of what a business needs or what your content looks like. So the building blocks that we have are in a design system, and they are all pretty accessible. So everything that is there out of the box is accessible, but you can customize it further to kind of force the kind of things that you want to force. Like if you want to add specific checks, you can add those. We also make them available open source so that you could more easily adapt them and put them in. But the keyword is customizability. Like it's so customizable that, yeah, I mentioned that earlier. Like most of our clients have a completely different kind of backend that they log into because they want to make it work specifically for their use case. Like they might be building very different websites, or like e-commerce platform with different than like a documentation platform somewhere else. So it depends on how it's used. But yeah, out of the box, things look nice. Having said that, we also found issues in our audit, right? So there are issues like in most websites and apps. But yeah, we're working on those, I'll say.
Yeah. So I'm not paid to say this, but I think Sanity is at least one of the ones that when we have looked into CMSs that are on in the group of better CMS, I don't think there is a perfect one that fixes everything or is absolutely perfect. We haven't found that before. So, but let's go to the question from Mitchell in the chat. No regulations require ATAG, but many regulations require WCAG, and ATAG is a great way to achieve WCAG. For this reason or any other reason, do you know of anybody using ATAG as a procurement criterion for an authoring tool?
So I know that the W3C used it when we looked for a new CMS, but that's kind of like using our own thing, right? So that's maybe not the best example. Maybe you know this. I believe in this European norms somewhere. It talks about authoring, but I can't remember the exact specifics. That I remember there was some of it in the European requirements, but it doesn't explicitly say use ATAG, but more like authoring tools matter. Do you know about this, Susanna?
Yeah, so we do regularly monitoring of procurement. I won't say that we are kind of monitoring everything that happens in procurement because that would be impossible, but we have done over a couple of years for large ICT clients that I cannot mention their name, to check how the EN standard is used and also what accessibility requirements are used in procurement in some of the EU countries, not across EU, but in the Nordics and Central European. And I cannot remember anyone anywhere mentioning ATAG. So what I know, it's not used in procurement. Unfortunately, it should be. I agree with that. And then we have another question in the so what you are talking a lot about WCAG, but as this is in the EU series, I just want to stress that it's the EN 301549 that is the minimum requirements. WCAG is part of that, but it's not enough. So just to make sure that our friends from across the pond are always remembering that WCAG is part of the legal system here, but not everything. So this is, I think, a shout out for everyone to use ATAG more. I know Hidde, you and I try to kind of raise that flag often. it's still not used enough. I think it has many good things in it, and also not least the way that the authoring, the content creation interface in itself should be accessible. So that's kind of the next step, I think, in this whole thing. So what is your take on this? Should the CMSs warn or kind of stop content creations to make mistakes? So you touched upon that a little bit. So you could either kind of provide a warning, or you can actually say this, it's not possible to publish this if it's not accessible. So what's your kind of being a developer on the back end of a CMS system? What do you think is the best way to do that?
Yeah, I guess at Sanity we love the provided flexibility. Like there are different ways that organizations think about governance like this. If I was the CEO, I would probably, not of Sanity, but like of a company using a CMS, I'd probably say, stop all the presses when there's an accessibility problem. But I think it depends really like on the culture within the organization and how they look at the world and what sort of things they're trying to achieve. and it depends on the accessibility issues too, maybe. So maybe if you have an image inside of a link is an example of like where it would just create a big barrier if there was no alternative text. So maybe that's where you stop the presses, whereas in some other cases, maybe you don't. But it's really hard to, because we don't really want to fight one WCAG criterion against another, right? They're all equally important, and all disabilities matter. You don't want to have like preferences between that. But I can imagine like some issues maybe are more severe or create huge barriers, whereas others might be more inconvenience based, and yeah, you would do less there maybe. Yeah.
I think it's an interesting question. So we have had actually a couple of clients, if I put my Funka hat on, that did go in the way of kind of stopping. So they asked us to actually build in things that were stopping the content creators, and we had to release that after a while because it just didn't work, because some people got really angry or crazy, or they couldn't push things out or so. So I think it's kind of, in theory, it's a good idea, but in practical terms, it becomes really, really hard, at least for large organizations. I mean, we have clients with 1,000 content creators, and most of them are not even kind of trained in being content creators. They just happen to create content. So I think it's a tricky question. But what we did see in the cluster project was that one way of kind of supporting content creators, not only, I mean, the automation is perfect when it works, but as you mentioned, and not everything can be automated yet, at least. Yeah. But what we did was, when we did the user testing with content creators, was to try, for example, AI for image recognition, so that the AI is kind of describing the image, and that is not perfect, far from perfect, and especially not in Swedish. But that kind of nudged the web author to write a better alt text. So it was actually useful to have a kind of bad example, because then it opened the alt text thing for them automatically, so that they saw, and now no, this is not the image, this is not a good description. So then they altered it. It was much easier to get them to do that than to actually start writing from zero. So I think it can also be a little bit used cleverly. You can kind of support and guide the content creator with the things that are not possible to do automatic.
Yeah, and I guess you don't want to annoy people. That's like the trick. I think that's the same maybe in people who write code, like developers. There are tools that will stop you when you write the wrong like syntax or something like that. And they are also infuriating, and people get really annoyed by them. Like they enforce certain standards in coding, or like make sure you start on a new line, or those sorts of things. But yeah, they can also annoy people a lot. So you want to, nudge the right way, as you say. That
it's absolutely a balance. No, absolutely. So we have another question here. Have you done a review of major CMS systems like Wix, Webflow, Squarespace, Shopify, and which ones are most accessible?
Yeah, it's really hard to say. I've not done formal reviews of any of those. I know Wix have a very big accessibility department, but it's really hard to say, because I don't know about the others very specifically. So yeah, I don't know. I haven't done reviews, but do ask them for it, because if like we as accessibility professionals ask the vendors, then that can help maybe push accessibility further as well.
Yeah, definitely. So we haven't really done any comprehensive study yet. I mean, we have done it, but it's not recent, so I don't want to say anything because I don't know the situation right now. But in this cluster project, we did work with Drupal, Umbraco, Joomla, Plone, and SiteVision, and also Tiny MCE. So at least they are kind of on the maybe not moving in the direction of being perfectly accessible, but at least they are now adding the accessibility features, the built-in accessibility features that we produced in that, or developed in that project. They are kind of adding it to their standard things. So at least those are ones that I know work in a good way with it, but I couldn't kind of list them. So we need to finish up, I think. If Malcolm, if you could please share the ending slide. So I want to thank Hidde for this presentation, and just do a little bit of marketing for the next thing happening in the EU series. So as usual, we have a webinar, and then we have a drop-in session the week after. So any one of you who are interested in member benefits or wanting to know more about the certification and such, we have a drop-in session next week while we are also participating in the TechShare Pro. So TechShare Pro is a UK-based hybrid event run by the AbilityNet, which is the UK chapter of IAAP, and we will do presentations and panels and things like that. It is a conference that costs money, but we have the drop-in as a free of charge piece here. So on the 16th of November, Wednesday, I guess next week, from 1:30 to 2:30 Central European time, we have a link, I think, posted in the chat, and you can register there for this drop-in session. We will have members from Spain and the Czech Republic, maybe also from Sweden, talking about the member benefits and so on, and the chapters. And my colleague Alberto Highlander, who is the coordinator of the EU initiative now together with me, he will also be presenting the IAAP EU benefits there. So there is a code that you are supposed to use to get free access to this because it's part of the TechShare Pro. So the code is capital letters AN100. So AN100, and the link is posted in the chat. And we can also provide that in the email afterwards, I think, if Malcolm can add that to the thing. So we will also send you an email after this with the link to the recording and so on. And then a little bit of marketing of what is happening next. We have, yes, on the 29th of November, we have Harmonie Altinier from Keona in France, who is presenting on ableism and digital accessibility from a French citizen's point of view. Very interesting webinar. And actually, I know now that we do have the week before, on the 22nd of November, we will also have Daniel Montalvo from W3C talking about their training programs and how it connects to the body of knowledge and certification of IAAP. We don't have the title ready for that yet, but that is also happening. So next week, TechShare Pro, and then the upcoming 2 weeks, we have webinars, our regular webinar series, and also more drop-ins in December. So with that, I would like to thank you, a special warm thank you to Hidde, of course, and thank you for sharing so much material with us. And I know you have loads of interesting information also in your blog, and I'm following you in all channels, and it's always something new happening there. And thank you also to Rachel and Malcolm from the US office supporting us with the technology today, and of course to our lovely interpreters, captions, and sign language, always perfectly provided by our partners. Thank you very much, and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.